Topic 3, Greco-Roman religion and mythology. All right, so there are two things that I think we need to talk about at the very beginning of this segment. One is the title, Greco-Roman. The Romans tinker with Etruscan roads, and they tinker with Carthaginian naval technology, and they also tinker with religion. They don't have their own gods. They get them from the Greeks. And they transform most of them, and they take some of the stories, and they change them, and they add, and they delete. But it's really, if you're talking about the Greeks, you can talk about Greek religion. But when you get to the Romans, you have to talk about Greco-Roman religion. That's the first thing. Another example of Rome conquering Greece, but Greece conquering Rome. And the second thing is we need to talk about religion and mythology. And this is a case, if you've taken a course on Greek civilization or on Roman civilization, my students will hear this shtick twice. And it's the following. There are two areas where modern conceptions totally get in your way of understanding the ancient world. One is religion, and the other is slavery. So later on in this course, we'll talk about slavery and how your preconceptions of slavery, which immediately go to American racial slavery, help you not one word when it comes to the ancient world, here too with religion. We live in a Western monotheistic world. Now, in the West, we are having increasing encounters with Eastern religions, absolutely, certainly. But culturally, I think we can say that the West is dominated by the three Abrahamic faiths of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And among the three, Christianity, and among all of the Christian churches, certainly Catholicism, Roman Catholicism, is dominated by an institutional sense, a hierarchy. And that doesn't help us when we're trying to get a hold of the ancient world. Because people today, for instance, they say, I believe in God, but I don't go to church, synagogue, or a mosque. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Now that may help us, because when we use the word religion, we tend to think of an institution and a hierarchy. You don't have that in the ancient world. I mean, there are institutional priests. There's a job of the pontifex. The chief priest is the Pontifex Maximus. But it's not in the same way that, because there's no Vatican of Greco-Roman religion. Let me put it that way. It's more decentralized. And so the difference between ancient religion and a modern Western monotheistic conception gets in the way. So try to put that to the side. Try to think more of religion in terms of spirituality, like people say, I don't go to church, but I believe in God, and mythology, and mythos, these stories, mythos plus logos, speaking about these stories. Begin to bring us to what Greco-Roman religion was and what it wasn't. So it wasn't institutional, hierarchical. It wasn't monotheistic. And the role of the gods is different than when we think. We tend now, though sometimes we ask, why is God, Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, mad at me, from a Western perspective? We tend more today to speak the language of love in religion, and it gets us angry when people use religion to promote hatred or bigotry or violence, because we get angry at that because it doesn't click. Hey, that's not what religion is about. So what was religion, or really more, better to say mythology, about? What was the role of the gods? If we're coming from a loving perspective, what was the role of the gods there? The human-divine relationship was very contractual. It was even cold. Essentially, you sacrificed to the gods in the hopes that they would preserve you, favor you. But if the gods didn't, it's your fault. If the gods cursed you, it's because you didn't make the sacrifice properly. You didn't do the right actions. The sacrifice was somehow less than perfect. The sheep was blemished when it was supposed to have been unblemished, for instance. And you interacted with the gods in a number of ways. There were the large gods that everybody knows. I tell my students it's kind of like, major leagues, AAA, AA, single A. And the large gods everybody knows, Jupiter, right? Neptune, Poseidon. Then there's the second rank of gods, and that second rank of gods has some very interesting female gods. Bona Dea, the Earth Mother, who's Gaia, G-A-I-A, in every culture. Every culture has this Earth Mother, the Blessed Virgin Mary. And this Earth Mother, one of the oldest representations we have of a goddess, she is this Earth Mother, huge breasts filled with milk, squatting, sometimes with genitalia very clear. So she gives birth and she nurtures the baby. Ceres is the goddess of grain, cereal, the mother who provides food. So female gods are very important as well. And then you have everyday household gods. So AAA, AA, single A ball for you baseball fans. One is Vesta. Now you've heard of the Vestal Virgins who tend the sacred fire in Rome. And when that fire goes out, Rome is going to fall, like when the crows leave the Tower of London. But you also would have had a shrine to Vesta in your house because Vesta is the goddess of the hearth. And if your fire goes out, it's cold and you can't cook. Or one of my favorite gods, a Greek god that the Romans loved too, Penates, and the word pantry comes from that. She is the goddess of the cupboard, and you would pray that your cupboard would not go bare. And you wanted to make sure that you didn't aspire to be a god because then you might be struck down. If you evidenced hubris, and you will see that word spelled H-Y-B-R-I-S and H-U-B-R-I-S because Greek vowels are different than the alphabet that we use, so the Y and the U are interchangeable, hubris. Hubris is extreme arrogance where you don't know your place and you are aspiring to be the gods, and the gods tell you that what goes up must come down. And the higher you climb, the harder and further you fall. We think of Icarus trying to sail to the sky using wings made of, huge wings for his body, made of bird wings held together by wax. And the closer he gets to the sun, the wax melts. Helios, the sun god, has melted them. Icarus is literally trying to raise himself up to the level of the gods. So the rituals can be, I think, gathered under a phrase that I found very helpful when I was studying by a Roman historian by the name of Hooper, who said, Roman religion is religion without love. And that strikes us as so different, right, from the way we think about religion nowadays. It all focuses on sacrifice, and sacrifice is for the act of propitiation, to allay the gods, to tell the gods everything is fine so they won't get angry at us. And how do we know what the gods think of us? We have to take augury or prophecy, and those are basically related to each other. Augury is the taking of the signs, the reading of the signs, the flight of birds, the entrails of an animal, the blood spatter when I sacrifice a bull. And I read those signs, and they tell me whether I should or shouldn't do something. So obviously the taking of the signs is related to prophecy. And so the role of the pontifex, the bridge builder, P-O-N-T-I-F-F. Pontiff is one of the titles of the Roman Pope nowadays. Pontifex is the bridge builder, is to link this world to the next. That makes the priest advisor very powerful, as he had been in ancient Mesopotamia, as we had seen under the Haruspex in the earliest Etruscan society, which became important in the Roman monarchy. And so the rituals are more about, let's use two Latin words, pietas as opposed to fides. Pietas, normally translated as piety. And that's, my little old Italian grandmother mumbling her rosary while she goes to a Catholic Mass. That's a form of piety. But pietas in this really means respect. It's Aeneas carrying his father out of Troy as Troy falls. He is known as Pius Aeneas, Pius Aeneas. It means honoring the ways of the gods and the ways of my elders. It has an element of respect. It makes you the smaller and the god or the authority the larger. More than fides. Fides, faithful. The infidel is the unfaithful one, to use an English word. So the ritual is more an act of piety than it is an act of faith, an act of trust. It's really an act of fear. I'm going to make this ritual, make this sacrifice, in fear that if I don't, something bad will happen to me. And then, of course, when you look at this mythology, you say, how could these people be my gods? They are scandalous. It's like a soap opera. It's a way of saying, gee, if the gods sleep around so much, if they lie, cheat, and steal, if they prepare acts of vengeance and revenge, gee, then it must be okay for me to. And that is anthropomorphism. It must be okay for me to do those things if the gods can do it. We have, again, to use a modern conception and go backwards, we talk about God in the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, God making human beings in God's image. This kind of looks like the opposite. We make the gods in our image to reflect our actions and, in fact, to allow, to validate our actions, even the lousy actions of anger and fear. So it tells us a lot about the Romans, for sure. It tells us that the Romans are looking for an out. Now, how about this myth as an historical resource? If these are all just stories, what does that tell us? Well, it doesn't really tell us much about those gods. If you believe in the gods, then it tells you about the gods. But it also tells us something about the Romans. We can use myth as an historical resource because the myths cumulatively tell us what the Romans valued or didn't value. They tell us that there was this climate of fear as opposed to a climate of love. And it means that they were put on tension. Now, you cannot underestimate the role of the Greeks on Roman mythology. The mythology itself, the gods, their names, their actions in Rome all start with Greece. And only a very few don't have their names changed. Mars is one of them. But more commonly, Athena, the Greek goddess of wisdom, becomes Minerva, the Roman goddess of wisdom. Same goddess, same attribute, different word. And we have this expression that Rome conquered Greece, but Greece conquered Rome. So Rome actually, as it expands as a republic later on, a little bit further on in our story, about 250, 100, 150, Rome actually physically conquers Greece. And then everything that's Greek, the Romans just grab onto while they say that they hate it. They say, oh, the Greeks are materialistic, the Greeks are secular, the Greeks are decadent, the Greeks do this and the Greeks do that, and we can't get enough of it. So they take the mythology wholesale, they take the science wholesale, they take the math, and they take the architecture wholesale, such that we talk about Greco-Roman architecture, Greco-Roman art, Greco-Roman mythology. And so this double attraction and revulsion, the love-hate relationship, which is extremely common, means that just exactly as the Romans are saying, oh, those Greeks, they're studying Greek everything. They're studying Greek philosophy. They're studying Greek science and math. Education becomes Hellenized, we say. Elos is the Greek's word for themselves. You may remember at the end of the 2004 Athens Olympics, everyone was so excited at the closing ceremonies. It had gone well, it was a great triumph, and the Greeks just chanted again and again and again, Elos, Elos, Elos. Greece, Greece, or us, us. They did a good job. It was a great moment of national and ethnic pride. So Roman Latin education becomes Hellenized. They're reading Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and by the way, they're doing it in Greek. Wow, as people say nowadays, you know Latin, you can read Latin. That was no big deal. In Rome, that was the language. You could be an idiot and read Latin, the dumbest kid in your class, and know how to speak Latin. To speak Greek, that was the way. It was the language, the way French was the language of science and diplomacy in the 17th and 1800s. In the 19th century and the 20th century, in fact, English was the common scientific language, especially in Europe and in Russia. Russian scientists and American scientists corresponded in English. So The language itself, if you wanted to be an upper class, upper crust, educated Roman, you would read and speak Greek. And what were you learning to read and speak Greek? The mythology, the stories. And then when you were commenting on modern day politics, you would use stories of Homer and Hesiod to make your point about the gods. And yet there's this revulsion, this threat that they talked about of Greek materialism, and I'll give you an example. In the year 186 BCE, it's the first time that we can find that the Senate acted to outlaw the rights of a foreign power. Kind of a modern use of the word foreign, but in other words, the Greek right of Dionysius. Now, Dionysius is the favorite god of lots of college kids. They don't know it. He's the frat boy god. He's the god of wine. I say the god of beer to update it. And he's the god of sex, since alcohol and sex often go together. Dionysius becomes Bacchus in the Roman tradition, and a bacchanalia is an orgy, a drunken orgy, a frat party gone crazy, gone over the edge. And the celebration of Dionysius, or Bacchus, Dionysius in the Greek and Bacchus in the Roman, were very popular among women. In fact, in ancient Greece, the Feast of Dionysius was one of the favorite feasts of women because it was one of the few times a year where women could celebrate a feast apart from male supervision. And that drove the men crazy. What are the women doing over there? And there were all of these kinds of rumors that the women were having sex with each other because Dionysius is the god of wine, and wine goes with sex, or maybe they had one man over there, or maybe there was a boy. What was going on over there? And that converted over into the Roman system, and then bacchanalia feasts began to sprout up in Rome, again with women who were acting without male supervision, and the men who were senators, and let's remember, the Senate was only open to men, saw this rite, this celebration, as the words that they used were, it was disorderly. Okay, that makes sense. But how about this? It was unpatriotic. And now I think we're going to really get to the crux of it. It undermined authority and social position, especially among women and the disadvantaged, but at the same time it was wildly popular. And in fact, so important is this religious, spiritual, mythological event that the Roman Senate votes to outlaw it. Now, what did the Romans do when they met other religions? Because let's remember that as Rome spreads, it's learning a lesson from Alexander the Great. Now, whether Alexander the Great, who dies in 323 BCE, intended an empire of mixed cultures, or whether he just had that as an idea but never was able to put it into practice, it's pretty clear that Alexander, unlike many of his generals, believed that Greek culture, or really Macedonian in his case, was superior to the others, but he had some measure of respect for those other cultures. And if you intermarry with those other cultures, then your empire is going to be stronger, won't it? Because if I intermarry with those other cultures and have children, then those other families are going to be less likely to rebel because I'm putting children and grandchildren at risk. And what better way, Alexander said, to get the people on my side than not only to say, my God, I went to the Delphic oracle, and my God, Apollo, when I asked him, who is my father, said, you are invincible, my son. That's one thing. But Alexander went to Siwa, an oasis, an oracular site in Egypt, and he said, am I your son? And the answer, or so he said, was, yes, you are the son of Amun-Ra, or Amun-Re. You are Pharaoh, the son, S-O-N, of the sun, S-U-N. And so this notion that if I spread, and the Republic is spreading, it's not an empire yet, but when the empire spreads even further, when it encounters these other religions, it sometimes has a love-hate relationship, but washed out over the long run, basically the Romans were open to other faiths as long as you prayed to your gods for the safety of our government. You prayed to your gods for the safety of our government, and your gods and the practice of your gods doesn't threaten us. And when it does, as in the rites of Dionysius or Bacchus in 186, they outlaw them. But that stands out, actually. That stands out as the exception to the rule. In general, as Rome spread as a republic and later on as an empire, we find a fair amount, a relatively fair and open toleration of other pagan polytheistic religions, known as cults. Now we have creed, code, and cult. Creed is what you believe. Code is your sexual ethics, your morality based on that. And then cult. Cult does not mean a cult as we think of in its most negative terms where, teenagers are being brainwashed. That's not what we're talking about. Cult means liturgical practices, and all religions have a cult in the positive sense of the word. The clothes you wear, the prayers you say, the order of certain rituals of fasting during Ramadan or Lent. And so the Romans flat out adopt this Greek system. And then they have this odd relationship with foreign religions, and most of the time they are open to those foreign religions, except when they're not. Let me say that again. Most of the time they're open to these foreign religions, except when they're not. And they're not when they fear that the practice of that foreign religion has gone a little too far. The example of Dionysius comes up. So foreign religions were challenging and attractive because if your gods are accepting our rule, then you are more likely to accept my rule. And if 100 gods are praying for me, 150 is 50 more. More is better. That's how paganism and polytheism works in the ancient world. They can also be dangerous, but they can also be useful. And let's look at some examples of those. Maybe the most attractive and feared cult from Egypt was the cult of Osiris and Isis. Twins, brother and sister, sometimes also depicted as lovers. And Osiris and Isis were known as mystery cults. You would be initiated into their mysteries, and nobody could tell you what went on. There were secret code words, but there was kind of a rebirth that took place. Now, that could be seen as dangerous because are you getting information? Are you having subversive meetings? Is this really a political association? Or it can work when converted into the cult of Mithras, which was the male testosterone-driven cult of the bull, where you would take a man, you would bury him in a pit, you would put a grate over his head, put a bull on the grate, sacrifice the bull by cutting his jugular, and the man would be baptized in the blood, and this was how you got the elite soldiers involved. That's a mystery cult and initiation rite that works very nicely. But what about monotheists? Well, they don't fit into this pagan polytheistic situation, do they? And while we are going to see examples later on in our course of Rome persecuting Jews and Christians, Judaism was what's known as a religio licita sometimes. It's a permitted religion. And the goal, again, was that the Jews wanted to say, we will pray to our God Yahweh, and we will pay our taxes for the safety of your empire, first your republic and then your empire. And Judaism was largely left alone to practice as long as they paid their taxes and prayed to their God for the safety of Rome. Christianity, which in its first 100 years, the Romans see Jews and Christians as the same thing, Christianity had some protection, but then as Christianity grew, it became a threat to Roman polytheism. But that's a much longer story for later in our course.